The women's movement has had many great leaders. Abigail Adams was one of the first well-recorded feminists of her time. Later on, in the 1800s, some of the most widely recognized figures became active. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Stanton were instrumental in the organization of the Seneca Falls Convention, at which the Declaration of Sentiments was signed. In the early 1900s, women like Elizabeth Stanton and Susan B. Anthony campaigned for women's suffrage, and Alice Paul and Lucy Burns formed the National Women's Party and helped pass the 19th Amendment, which signified the end of the first wave of the women's movement. The second wave feminist movement, which was from 1960s to the 1980s and focused primarily on gender inequality in American social structure and culture. This wave contained famous women including Simone de Beauvoir and Betty Friedan, who played a major role in sparking the feminist revolution. Another iconic figure in the second wave feminist movement is Gloria Steinem, a journalist and feminist activist who was the leader of the women's liberation movement and a co-founder of Miss Magazine, the first feminist magazine. The third wave feminist movement is partly focused on widening the range of women who identify with the movement to include more minority women. Important figures such as Maxine Hong, Kingston, and Gloria Anzulda represent the broadening spectrum of feminist activists. The third wave is still going on today. Unfortunately, it has nowhere near the vigor and enthusiasm that it had in the days of Alice Paul or Gloria Steinem. The Great Depression, World War II, and the kitchen debates are all important events that influenced the women's rights movement. The Great Depression attracted people like Eleanor Roosevelt, actively promoting women's rights during the Depression years. The Great Depression increased women's status and power in the home, gaining them a new voice in domestic decisions. World War II was also a great expansion of employment for women. They had the opportunity to be the breadwinner of their families. Finally, the kitchen debate, which was a conflict between the U.S. and Russia, proved that women were seen as nothing but housewives. The kitchen debate affected women because it clarified their purpose as housewives. There have been a number of documents significant to the women's movement throughout its history. The most important document of the first wave movement was the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. It was passed in 1919 and ratified in 1920. The most noteworthy document from the second wave was one that was never put into the Constitution. This was the ERA, or the Equal Rights Amendment. The amendment guaranteed that all people should receive equal justice under the law. Unfortunately, it did not get support from enough states to be ratified. One of the most important pieces of legislation in the third wave was passed by President Obama in 2009. This document is called the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009. The purpose of this act is to ensure that female employees earn as much as their male counterparts. This act was a triumph for the feminist movement and a sign that progress can be made. We hope that there will be more important documents pertaining to the women's movement in the future and that they will lead to a more equitable and thriving. In the 1973 Roe v. Wade case, Jane Roe challenged the Texas law of abortion. The court sided with Roe and the Texas law was taken down. We feel women should have the right to make their own decisions that they feel best fits their body. In the case of Adkins versus Children's Hospital in 1923, they ruled that women have the same rights as men do when it comes to work wages. Women are people just as men are, so we have the right to earn the same amount of wages that men do. The women's rights movement has been presented in the media through various ways. The first article is called "Sumner Announces Statue of American Hero and Rochester Resident Frederick Douglass Will Finally Be Placed in U.S. Capitol Building on June 19th." This article highlighted the fact that Frederick Douglass was a leading voice for women's rights. Frederick Douglass supporting the women's rights movement makes the movement more efficient and successful. The second article, Women, the Great Feminist Revival, an anti-Page 3 campaign, Slutwalks, and the relaunch of Spare Rib, shows that feminism is as vigorous and necessary as ever. Why did we ever doubt it? Asks Joan Smith. What about human rights? This article states that women's rights are human rights. It talks about women's rights to be educated, abortion, and other mandatory things. Some major issues with the women's rights movement are abortion, sexual violence, and equal pay, and representation of women. Women argued that banning abortion puts women at risk and that they have the right to control their own bodies. Women are also fighting for their rights against sexual violence because most cases of sexual violence go unreported. Equal pay is another popular issue that relates to women's rights because males in the U.S. tend to make more money than women, which is unfair. Lastly, the representation of women in the media is another issue that needs to be addressed. Women have frequently been underrepresented with minor changes in proportions over the past decade. This proves that women are viewed as minorities in many aspects of life. On the calendar, women have a day called the International Women's Day, which is on March 8th. It honors women's achievements and promotes women's rights. Also, the Office of Violence Against Women was created in 1995 to implement the Violence Against Women Act and to lead the national effort to stop domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. The Paycheck Fairness Act is an update of the Equal Pay Act. The Equal Pay Act requires that men and women be given equal pay for equal work. In today's society, there are many organizations that support the cause of women's rights. The purpose of these organizations are for women to have their voices heard. In our society today, we have different problems with women's rights than we used to. Now, women are more equal to men, but there is still much work to be done. We believe that the way to change the status of women in America is to change our culture's perception of women. This is a daunting task, but a necessary one. We have school programs that combat racism and bullying, yet we do not have any teaching the fair and respectful treatment of women. Half of all Americans. We cannot leave it up to the media to teach children how to view women. The media sexualizes women everywhere, from models to newscasters to the scantily clad women playing doctors and lawyers in TV shows. Women are objectified even behind the face of progress. Therefore, we propose that the third wave movement create a curriculum for schools that focus on women and girls. Some may say that this is unfair and would also have to focus on boys, but everyone needs us, boys and girls. Every boy has a mother, maybe a sister, a wife, and a daughter too. It is essential for him to know how to treat women well. Starting in kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, male students must be taught to respect girls' bodies and minds like they would a boy's. Female students must be taught to value themselves, mind and body, and never settle for less than they can achieve. If these behaviors were taught in school every year, there would be monumental changes to our society. In schools, there would be less bullying, fewer eating disorders and depression, less social conflict, less sexual assault, and there would be a more positive and safe environment overall. In the adult community, there would be less rape, less divorce, less disrespect, and a more peaceful and equitable society. Women make up half the population of this country. It is unfathomable to us that there is not already a precedent set for this kind of education system. The inequality between two groups of people that are so intertwined is amazing. Something needs to change, and it must change from the bottom up.
A movement is a movement of people working together, standing up together, strategizing together, and that's empowering. So I think it has to, it's not for us to determine what those issues are for you. We did it. We benefited from it. We want our daughters and our granddaughters to benefit from it. We don't want you to lose what we gained, but you got to figure out what's worth fighting for and be willing to stand up.